Hey guys, in this podcast we talk about different health topics. As we are not medical experts, we would ask for you to check with your doctor first before using any information provided in this podcast. Furthermore, we talk about third-party views in this podcast. Please know that we have no intention of misrepresenting their views, and we apologize in advance if we do so. Thanks.
Hey guys, what's up? A little bit new setup, but today we have an interesting topic for you guys. And what we're going to be doing is combining psychology with sociology and understanding human interaction. So today, the things I want to cover are human interaction. Why do some relationships click and others don't? What is love?
It's simple. We all got this.
But realize like a little bit of a disclaimer is realize that like this is all a subjective perspective. We're going to miss a lot of things. Like many of these topics are far more complex than we're going to talk. But we're going to talk about small elements so we can logically understand. So why don't we just jump right into it and stuff. So I have this psychologist who I love. He's like one of my favorites. His name's Abraham Maslow. I don't believe he's alive anymore, but during the 80s, he was really fascinated with, why is it that some people excel with communicating while other people don't? This interest developed because he had a professor, and he was just amazed how this professor's life was so different than his other professors. This professor, had friends in the classroom, outside of the classroom. He had a lot of influence, a lot of power. And he just did things slightly differently than the other professors, but he seemed to live just a much happier, much better life as a result of the social relationships that he had. So Maslow, because his interest was sparked there, decided to dedicate the rest of his career to understanding why people are like this. I don't want to get too much into Maslow's work. That's for a different podcast, but I want to get into my obsession with this topic. Basically, I've had the same thing. Like, I'm just very analytical. I want to know why it is that, like, some things work, some things don't. Why some people are successful in communicating, other people aren't.
So basically in this podcast, what we're talking about is how communication affects your relationships with other people.
Yeah. So at first, what I want to do is take like an overview of what goes on in a social interaction. So let's say that like a new person meets person A.
Okay.
So the first thing that's going to go on is sort of like when you encounter a new person, your subconscious thinking process actually does a lot of analysis of the person in front of you.
Okay.
Malcolm Gladwell, I'm actually going to take a little bit from Malcolm Gladwell's book. He described a process called thin slicing. So imagine that like someone walks in a room with a suit on.
Right. Okay.
He's wearing a suit, he's wearing a tie. Your subconscious makes associations about that suit instantly makes judgments based on what the person's wearing that suit. So what happens is all of the examples in your mind of people that you've met with suits on influence how you perceive this person that's right in front of you.
Gotcha.
So let's say that like every person you've met with a suit has came across as very professional, very genuine. Things like
doesn't
this.
use like any harsh language.
Doesn't use harsh language.
Uses very high.
Then you're gonna sort of put this on top of your perspective of the person. You're gonna see them through this lens as a person with a suit.
And you associate suits. With this type of personality.
Yeah, but let's say that you don't like people who wear suits. You might instantly dislike this person because in the past, people who have worn suits, are this way. And this is just a split-second judgment that your subconscious is making. It's not saying that it's going to predetermine the outcome of the rest of the relationship or anything.
Right.
Like you might learn to like him even though he's a suit, but your first judgment is coming across. This is our brains just naturally judge situations, and through thin slicing is one way. So thin slicing, of course, can be used to our advantage. Like, of course, wearing a suit is going to have, when people meet you for the first time, they're going to perceive you in a different way than if you're wearing like sports shirts and a shirt or something.
So in other words, we should perhaps wear suits for this podcast, and then we'll be perceived a little bit better, a little more professional, right? Yeah.
So that's the first thing that's going to happen in a social encounter. Realize that your subconscious brain is incredibly powerful, and it's really good at reading human emotion, human cues, and you're making a lot of assessments about a person without being consciously aware of it. I talked about in one of my psychology podcasts about how in a social encounter, one thing that's going through your subconscious is what you think the other person thinks of you, what you think the other person thinks that you think he's thinking of you, and what you think of the other person, what you think the other person thinks that you think of them.
Yeah.
All of those things are going on in your subconscious, and your subconscious is calculating these by, paying attention to facial expressions, body. And it's incredibly good at doing this.
Yeah, one thing I just want to mention about subconscious, we talked about this in our podcast, but think of your subconscious like the tip of an iceberg. Like your conscious is the tip, and the subconscious is the 90% that you can't observe. For every 10% conscious that you have 90% subconscious to get you to that 10% consciousness. So you will always have much more subconscious than consciousness. And that's a very critical thing because you can't control what you're actually thinking about. And so that's why all these the study of psychology actually comes from. It comes from this subconscious thinking that you're just simply not aware of. And the suit example is a manifestation of that.
So like when we're studying, we're often like seeing like what our subconscious is doing because people aren't consciously thinking of it. When you see someone in a suit, you don't go back in your head and say, oh, I remember this guy in a suit. I remember this guy in a suit. He's like this. He's like that. Like we don't do that, but our subconscious does it. And if we're aware of it, we can kind of see how we do that.
Right.
So that's the first thing that's going on is like there's going to be a lot of impressions made from the interaction. Like body language is going to have a big influence. Our subconscious reads body language very well. Vocal tonality has a big part. You know, like the way we talk to our grandma is very different than the way we talk to a friend. Like I'd be like, hey grandma, versus like, hey, what's up, so and so. Or you know, if you're derogatory towards someone, you'd like be like talking down to them.
Right. Yeah. One thing is really important to know is when you do like a study on how communication actually comes across, the vast majority, almost like 70% of it comes from body language. Yeah. Another 25% comes from voice tonality, and then 5% actually comes from the text.
I'm glad you added that. That's awesome. Yeah. Most of the way we communicate with each other is not through the words that we say. The words that we say often mask our intentions, and I do want to get into that because we speak indirectly to each other all the time.
Right.
Text messaging is really interesting because we don't see that element.
Right.
So to start off, we're making these assessments about these people subconsciously. So I've kind of broken down a social interaction and the qualities of a good social interactor into like 4 different things.
Okay.
Now this is a very subjective opinion of mine, and this is my attempt at logically understanding what the subconscious does. And many times when we do this, we fail. Hence the number of self-help books that fail at this.
Okay.
So one thing that I think is being assessed, and one thing that I think people who are really good with people do, is they're not very judgmental. So if you're in an interaction and you're judging the person, the other person's subconscious is fairly good at picking up on the fact that they are being judged.
Right.
So you're going to ask, how do we stop being judgmental? And I want to get to that after I go over all.
Yeah, and this is like really important for like an interview, a business interview, because your whole time you're thinking, what does the other person think of me? Same thing for a date as well, but that's why this is really important.
That's a great point. Like one thing I want to emphasize is that by logically understanding what is happening, we can improve like our emotional intelligence and be able to understand what the right thing to do in a situation is, which is a mutually beneficial thing because not only do we feel more comfortable, but the people around us feel more comfortable.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I think that we sort of emit judgment from ourselves, and it's interesting to note that people who are more intelligent tend to emit more judgmental things. That's why they say that that more intelligent people sometimes do poorly in business because they're so arrogant, and that arrogance comes across in judgment and stuff. So I believe that people assess judgment while they're communicating with you, which I'm also going to point out that judgment is not entirely bad. You can't not be judgmental because we just do it naturally.
Right.
But you can change your perspective, and by doing that, you can reduce your amount of judgment.
Right. A common theme that you'll see in a lot of these topics is a balance where you can't judge too much or judge too little. And if you judge in that medium, that's the best way to go about just conducting yourself in interviews.
You're awesome. That's such a great point because of all these traits that
you're going to be the material, Paul.
of all the traits that I want to describe that I feel like are being evaluated in a social situation, the thing that makes someone really good at them is the balance of them, and you'll start to see that as I describe more of them.
It's easy to do too much or too little of something.
So another thing that I think people are doing besides assessing how they're being judged is assessing the perceived power, the perceived social value of a person. Human interaction is very much like other species. I kind of like to see it as like a Christmas tree. Like we have higher branches and lower branches, and often we have like a top branch. Like in high school, people talk about the queen bee. We have hierarchies and stuff. And although it's not so like consciously determined, we don't talk about like so and so is like the pack leader.
Right.
All of this stuff's being assessed subconsciously. We're actually like pinging. Let me describe what pinging is, but. Pinging is basically like, imagine a Wi-Fi chip. It sends out a signal to get something back.
Right.
Well, people do this too kind of subconsciously, is they send out these pings, like maybe they tell a joke and they see the response of that joke, and then they use that to assess their social standing. So don't get too worked up with what your social standing is, because it doesn't really matter if you're like the alpha dog or not.
And also like as an example, like a real life example, like some people will like throw out a joke in an interview at the beginning. And if the person laughs at the joke, then they know to pursue more jokes like that.
Yeah.
That's why, and you're in a way judging them. You're saying what level of humor does this person have? And you use that for the next comment that you make.
Yeah, we use verbal words a lot of times just to assess our standings in the situation.
Right.
Which is really weird because we don't like to think of ourselves as like other species and having these hierarchies within ourselves.
Right.
But we often do, and we assess it subconsciously for the most part. But it might develop into conscious thoughts later. You
Right.
might think like so-and-so is like the scrub in the group, so-and-so is like the leader of the group.
Yeah.
So it's obvious like in companies you have like the leaders, you have like the loyal
Right.
workers and stuff. But in your friend groups, there's definitely like an element of this. But it doesn't mean that there's one leader and like one person on the bottom.
Yeah.
Like it can be like many people.
Just the point we want to draw is like it doesn't stop in 8th grade, it doesn't stop in high school. This same hierarchy pattern actually continues throughout adulthood and
and
for better or for worse.
Yeah, for better or for worse. But like I said, Christmas trees kind of describe this hierarchy. So like any given person is involved in like tons of different Christmas trees based on everyone they know. So in one group they might be at the top, another group they might be at the bottom, other groups, and sometimes when like our different groups interact, they see how we line up in those different groups.
Right. Now I think this is a good tie into the 150 rule.
Mm-hmm. That's
so
good.
The 150 rule, in case you guys don't know, is basically a study kind of looked at how many personalities can you keep track of, or how many people can you keep track of on like a relationship basis, and they found that number to be 150. So if, in other words, like if you have your family, you have maybe the people you go to college with, your close friends, your distant family. If you add up all those people, they should be under 150, because if they're not, you can't simply keep track of their life enough to actually know them. And normally most people won't know their last name. That's usually a good sign that you actually don't know the person. But if you'll know about 150 first and last names. Now, unless you're the president or somebody, or a politician, that's different, obviously. But the whole point is that you want to keep, like, if for churches, for example, if they exceed the 150 limit, they usually start to fall apart, or they'll split into two churches because they can't sustain the relationships with the pastor or with other people. So this is a very useful rule with keeping social contacts with individual people. You don't really want to exceed the 150 limit.
And that's sort of like a micro idea, like seeing socioeconomics like on a bigger scale. But even on the macro level, like the small scale, it's true. There's things like this too. Like they've observed that it's hard to have a conversation with more than 4 people, 4 or less. There can be a conversation, but when you add that 5th person in, the groups often split, 3 and 2. And if one person talks in front of all 5 people, it's more like giving a speech than it is interacting among a group.
So I think the change is from 4 people total in the group to 5.
Yeah,
so
that's when you start seeing a split off.
Yeah, because at that point, the problem is that you modify how you deliver a story or a message to the personality that you're talking to. Mm-hmm. So if you have 2 personalities, you can kind of like combine the 2 personalities and incorporate it. 3 maybe is a little bit of a stretch. But by the time you get the 4th, the personalities are so different from each other that you are giving a speech as if it was 10 or 20 people there, because the personality differences is too great.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's like pull everything back real quick. So I said that the first thing that's assessed in a interaction is like your first impression, and then like how the person's judging you is often assessed, and then power, their social value, like how important they are. And another one, which I think is really important, is like their warmness. This is considered like more of the feminine quality, like how like caring of a person they are.
Gotcha.
And that can be seen often in like mannerisms, like their tonality and things like that.
Yeah.
And the last one, I think it's less of something that's being, well, I guess it sort of is being evaluated, but it's less of one of the cores, more of an additional one that I just like to throw in. And I think that people kind of assess like how present the person they're communicating with is.
Right.
So like how, like, is this person I'm communicating there with me right now?
Do they fully understand what I'm trying to communicate?
Or are they like off in their own mind, like thinking about like various things that interest them while not really listening to you? Right. So we like pick up on people who are like sort of ignoring us or just saying like, yeah.
Right. Or they might be texting someone like, yeah, I understand you're playing the guitar. I'm kind of guilty of that sometimes. But yeah, that's like a very important topic as well.
So those are the 4 things, actually it might be 5, that I think are being evaluated constantly, and in which we not only do we evaluate body language subconsciously, but we also ping to determine these things.
Right.
We can ping to see how much power someone has, by
exactly.
how they respond to something we say. But the important thing to take from this is that I think that people who are good communicators are people who balance each one of these out. Because someone who's too powerful, like someone who emits too much power and comes off as like an alpha dog, is just like a boss. Like the boss often isn't friends with any of his coworkers.
Right.
Because he naturally has that from the social hierarchy that's built into a company. But people treat the boss much differently than they treat their coworkers.
Yeah.
So too much authority makes people very uncomfortable around you.
Right. It's kind of like, another similar parallel is when someone's very famous and you kind of are friends with them because you want to win favor with them for something that they can do. Mm-hmm. And the same way with the boss. The boss kind of keeps in check like your job, your salary, etc. breaks, and so you want to develop, like you want to suck up to him, or you want to give it your best reputation to him so that eventually he says, oh, I'm in favor of this person, and since I have the authority, I'm going to give him these privileges.
This is a great point, and it actually leads into something I want to discuss. So like a celebrity has a lot of power because they have a lot of social value. People just worship celebrities and stuff.
Right.
So by having this power, though, it makes it so that people are intimidated by them in a lot of situations. But that's why we as people appreciate humility. Yeah. Humility is basically the act of being a powerful person, but then not displaying those powerful characteristics around people and making them feel comfortable around us. So if I'm a powerful person, I can kind of disqualify that by saying something like a weakness of mine or something.
Exactly.
And so that's why we appreciate humility in people, because it kind of, if someone is powerful, it's intimidating, but when they kind of lower that powerness and balance it out more, we appreciate it.
Right. Yeah. And one thing we said in our podcast is if you're the boss, you want to be very open to feedback, even if it's from people below you, because that feedback is actually more important than the feedback you get, because you're not actually in the direct situation. So by being more humble, you automatically get better feedback, and your company usually runs better.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And then warmness too. You can have too much warmness. Think of, I'm trying to think, what's
well, some
an
people,
example?
some people, some others,
it seems manipulative. They're being so nice that it's manipulative. They do favor upon favor for you,
and then eventually you feel like you need to do something for them, even if they did something that you didn't even want for them. And it's the same. It's the tone too. Oh, thank you for coming. We really appreciate you coming here. It's that type of tone. And I think it's good, but if you do it too much, at some point people are just let's be real. Do you have?
Let's be real. Yeah. That's a great thing, the let's be real thing, and I do want to discuss that in a little bit. Right now, what I'm kind of talking about are subconscious things, and I'll get into how our internal world affects these subconscious things, and then I also want to get into how the outer world affects these.
All right.
So hopefully we have time for all this.
Yeah, hopefully on a long drive.
So warmness can be overdone because it seems manipulative. When someone's talking to you in a really high-pitched voice, let's say you're a person of power and someone's hey, what's up? You're so awesome. It doesn't, people don't appreciate that. They don't like that, because the problem with too much warmness is it comes off as needy. The problem with too much power is it comes off as, it's sharp and aggressive.
Yeah.
That's why they're considered the masculine, feminine traits. And that's why, as a person, you need to be able to balance these out.
And also, one thing I want to say is, if someone's going through a really depressing time, sometimes it can be very annoying if you just take care of them and then and that's it, because what they're thinking is, oh, so you're just saying if you say a couple nice words to me and you kind of care for me, you're going to make me better. That's not going to do anything for me. This doesn't count as my sympathy treatment. And I think some people do that, and people get very, very annoyed, and they get even madder at that person. So
some of it too is I know exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes when you're upset and you're talking with someone and they're just constantly being warm towards you, you kind of think that they're avoiding what's at hand. They're being indirect with you, and they're not willing to face actual conversations and being real.
Right.
So being real gets into our next topic. So all of these things are kind of being assessed on the subconscious level. Now there's sort of more of a little bit outer level of stuff that's going on in relationships. So I discussed before, how is it that some people click while other people don't? If you notice, when you talk to new people that you've never met before, oftentimes the conversations are very superficial. Things that are discussed are maybe baseball, or what's the weather like? What's the weather like? It's the cliche example. But when you're talking to your friends, you don't talk about that stuff. When you're talking to an aunt or uncle, you're gonna talk about these
their
more
children,
superficial
maybe,
things. So there appears to be a phase where you go from initial interaction to breaking through into a more comfortable phase.
Right.
And when you break into this more comfortable phase, suddenly conversations become much more real.
Right.
Instead of talking about how great the day is, we start using our verbal line, discussion, to talk about things that are true. When we break through this, we often start hearing the real pieces of people. They'll say oh, I hate so-and-so. I hate Sally. Sally never does her job. But no one's going to tell you this from an initial interaction because it's socially incorrect. So that gets into, actually, someone asked me, how do you make best friends? I don't have any best friends. How do you make them? I think that there's 3 elements to making a best friend. One is, shared goals.
Right, common interest.
Another is common interest. Shared goals is more you both have an objective to do this, and because you both have that objective,
do a podcast.
Do a podcast, me and Nick. Shared commonality, shared interests, liking the same music, things like that. And then the last part, which I think is one of the most important, is time. Just spending time with people. And often this barrier from going from superficial to more comfortable conversations with people occurs because of time spent with a person. You can't expect to just go meet someone and then instantly get into it. But that is what really good communicators can do. They can break this sort of superficial barrier and get into real communication with people much quicker. And I guess we could discuss in a later podcast. I want to discuss more of like how that's done.
Right.
I'm no like expert at any of this stuff, but I do like want to.
Yeah.
I have a reason for thinking about this stuff, and it's because I want to apply it to myself in some way.
Right. Yeah. There's a couple of points I just want to comment on. In my opinion, being real actually in reality is talking about something more important to the person you're talking to. So when you say I want to talk about something real, in other words, you're really saying I want to talk about something I'm very interested in, or what the other person is very interested in. That's why superficial talking is so boring. Yeah, because neither person is interested.
And remember too that like most communication is not about what the words being said, but the like feelings. Like
right.
I don't know how many times like I've seen it or been in a situation like where I'm talking to someone and I can just tell they don't really want to be there and they're like trying to get away.
Right.
And I just feel it. I don't consciously know why, but I can just feel that they want to get away. And we're talking like on and on, maybe for like even an hour about something that neither of us care about. But the reason why we do it, of course, is because if you're in a room full of people and you're not talking, you're going to be like ostracized. People are going to think you're weird.
Right, yeah.
It's what social protocol is to talk to people. So we feel obligated to talk to people even when we don't have to, because otherwise we look bad.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to comment on too is Paul made the really good point that time really builds your relationships. And that's true. The other thing that also destroys relationships is time itself if you're far apart and you don't spend much time. So let's say it's the year 2013 and you've spent 4 years with this bro or this guy next to you, and then all of a sudden you don't spend 10 years with him. Your friendship is still greater than this if you never met the guy, but the point is that during those 10 years, your relationship with him, like this, the bond strength, I guess, just decreased with time, because you don't know the person as well. But I want to talk about another podcast on memories.
We'll talk about that. And like another thing, kind of on that topic is, Nick, try to guess what quality is causes the most attraction.
Looks?
No, that's like what most people guess is looks or personality or something like that. But the number one thing that causes attraction, that at least researchers say is the number one thing, is proximity. So you're more likely to marry someone who is in your life and near you at most times than you are just because someone's good looking or something. So if you want to apply that somehow, I guess you just start showing up around. But don't be creepy. Don't.
Yeah. But right, I agree with you. I like a lot of romance stories. The guy wins the girl, but sometimes he's just there the whole time. Yeah, and that's what makes it the most romantic, when the underdog has been there the entire time for her.
Well, that actually would be a great topic to jump into, because something I want to talk about now. Why chick flicks are not real.
So, you can't kill our hopes.
Yeah. So a lot of guys. First, a little disclaimer. It's like I'm no expert. I'm sure I'm an idiot in this area. People can make fun of me for all the mistakes I made.
We're definitely not experts.
We're not experts, but these are my thoughts and stuff. But I think a lot of people get social relationship advice from movies, and guys get a lot of social relationship advice from chick flicks, and chick flicks are just not accurate reflections of reality. Okay, so
and neither is sitcoms.
So doing the stuff that people in chick flicks do to get girls is very bad. So I'll explain. Okay, so imagine two situations. All right, so a girl is going to school, and there's one guy who buys her a ton of flowers and stuff. He just keeps buying her flowers, and they just keep showing up at her house. Now, in some situations, the girl's going to really appreciate this. But in other situations, the girl's going to think the guy's really creepy. What do you think is differentiating between the creepy and the really sweet guy thing? So why is it that sometimes the girl says this guy's really sweet, and other times the girl says this guy's really creepy?
Just how much they know the actual person? Other person? I don't know.
Well, that's an element to it, but I'd say that the distinguishing factor is that the one guy's attractive and the other guy's not. A lot of guys think that it is attractive to buy flowers and things like that. But of course, it's a sweet thing to do and a nice thing to do. But if the girl's not attracted to you, then it comes across as needy and manipulative, because you're using it as a technique to get the girl to like you. Right. But if you're attractive and the girl already likes you, and attraction is a complicated topic. A lot of it has to do with social value, social communication, personality. Personality is kind of the broad term too, that encompasses all this, looks, things like that. But if the girl's attracted to you, then sure, go out and buy flowers for her and buy her a nice dinner, and she'll think you're really sweet. But if she's not attracted to you, doing these things just come across as manipulative, and they're gonna. The girl might be like, "Oh, it's so sweet of you. You're such a good friend." Guys get friend zoned because the girl's just plainly not attracted to them.
Well, okay, but one thing I want to say though is that sometimes the guy doesn't know if she's attracted to him or not, and guys are, at least I am, are just terrible readers of that. And the thing is that if you maybe sending out flowers is your ping. That is your way of testing to see whether she thinks you're a creep or sweet. Like,
yeah, I just would say that it's a terrible way to paint because it's just very manipulative. Of course, like, a girl might say so, like, it was really coming from your heart and stuff, but she's either gonna find you creepy or she's gonna think you're just a friend, because without that initial attraction.
Friend with flowers? What?
Just say, like,
roses.
So sweet.
Go with roses. No,
yeah. So
you can't send a bad message with that.
But yeah. So basically, just in relationship stuff, a lot of the problems come from just the guy's not attracted to the girl, and then he does this stuff, and it is just manipulating.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so like, for example, like, I guess if you're going to like a bar to like talk to girls, what do you think is like, why do you think most guys mess up? Now, this is just my observation. I am by means no expert of this, but what do you think would cause guys to mess up?
Just being like so nervous that they like overexcite. Like, they're like, oh, hey, how nice to meet you, and like all this.
But I'm sure you can find plenty of counterexamples where a guy was nervous and the girl still liked them.
Oh, okay.
Like, of course, like, nervousness is often considered like an unattractive quality, and I think it is unattractive because girls like profess that they like confidence and stuff in a guy.
Yeah, I think you want to have a little bit of nervousness.
A little bit of nervousness is good, because if you're not nervous at all, then they're like, this guy must do this all the time. This guy must be like a psycho or something.
Yeah, and actually that's the same thing for like an interview.
A job interview. Yeah,
you want to actually be a little nervous because
nervousness is okay.
They want to see that you take this serious, and if you didn't take it serious, then you wouldn't be nervous.
Mm-hmm.
So
the answer to my question is, I think that the big problem that a lot of guys have when trying to talk to girls is that we talked about how like conversations can be really superficial, and then they can also get into like sort of a comfortable area. And when conversations are in a comfortable area, then people are talking about like, oh, where do you go to school? What are you studying? Things like that. But when people in the superficial thing, that's just not a good conversation. And so most girls, I think, who get approached by guys, the guys start trying to break into that comfort phase before the superficial phase has gone through, or before the girl's attracted to them. Right. So I think that most guys mess up because they like start a conversation of like, oh, where do you go to school? Like, and when you're approached like this on a daily basis and people constantly do it to you, you see it as manipulative. Like, this guy's just talking to me to get with me, or you see it as incredibly boring because you're tired. Like, I mean, like, how many people have been to like a family reunion and like you get asked like 50 times like, oh yeah, what is it that you're studying again? And you just told them 3 months ago what you're studying. It's like, ugh. Right. So I think a big problem that people have is trying to push into this comfort thing too quickly. And
I agree.
Like, what most people just want in like a relation, like when they're meeting someone, is just like positive emotions from the person. Like, when someone can come over to you and make your day better than it was before, it's awesome. But when someone comes over you and starts interviewing you, like asking all these questions like, hey, I am so and so from NBC, and today I'm going to ask you, where do you go to school? What do you study? Things like that.
Down the list.
It's down the list. And so this is sort of an example of the outer things that are happening, the conscious things. So we discussed the subconscious things and these things that are being assessed, and then this is kind of an example of the outer things, like what verbal communication does to the conversation. So I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about being a judgmental person and how it can be read by people. Now, people have different levels of their ability to read a social situation, and this is like the coined term like emotional intelligence. Your subconscious plays a big role in it too, like how well you can perceive. If you're present to the moment, you're more likely to pick up on the subtleties of behavior than if you're like, you had a bad day at work, and so at different moments you might have more EQ than other moments.
Right.
But judgment, being a judgmental person is something that everybody struggles with. It's like kind of the core one of the core teachings of like the Bible, like the New Testament of the Bible. Like, Jesus says like, don't look at the speck in your neighbor's eye when you have like a stick in your own eye or something like that.
Yeah, but the whole point is it's cross-cultural too.
It's cross-cultural.
Yeah, Christianity.
And a lot of it is just, not environmental, but biological. We naturally assess people. So this is something I've always struggled with because I'm like an INTJ and I'm very analytical, as you can probably tell. Yeah. And I like to break things down and I like analyze people's behavior. And like I say, like, this person is here on the Christmas tree and this person's here.
Yeah.
And so it's really bad. And so like I had a bad habit of being like overly judgmental. So I wanted to get rid of it. So I worked like really hard to try to do that. And I probably still suck, but I found this thing in psychology. I don't know why I just did the quotes, but I found this thing in psychology called the fundamental attribution error. And understanding this helped me to really like stop being so judgmental. So see, like, what's going on here is that our cognition, what we think in our head, can affect those subconscious qualities, and we can manipulate them through our conscious thoughts. So the degree of judgmentalness comes partially from our conscious thought, and it can be modified by our cognition.
Right.
So for example, like, the fundamental attribution error is basically this idea that we tend to blame, like when other people mess up, we tend to blame it on personality qualities, while when we mess up, we tend to blame it on situational characteristics.
Right.
So the normal example that's used is someone tripping on a rock. So let's say that there's this giant rock, and you just see some random guy walk by, and they trip on the rock. You start laughing and stuff. You're like, "It's hilarious."
Yeah.
But one of the assessments you make is that this guy is a clumsy person.
Right. He's so clumsy.
He's so clumsy. Yeah. Or like in a car crash, you say this guy's just a reckless driver. He's just a reckless human being.
Right.
Something like that. But when you're in a car crash, you're like, I couldn't believe that car was in front of me. Like,
they
why
stopped
was it
so
there?
suddenly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, or
why was that giant rock on the ground? Who was the idiot who put that there?
Right.
So you can see. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. Yeah. So
you can see basically that you tend to evaluate situations personally by situational means, while you judge other people by personality means.
So, and that channels into the whole theme of you thinking you're number one. And a lot of people don't say that. They're like, I don't think I'm number one. But odds are that you do. And that's puzzled me for a very long time. Like, why do people think like they're number one? Like, and I actually think it actually has some evolutionary advantage to thinking that you're number one.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, like, you could say someone's egotistical, but they do have a big part in their own life. So shouldn't they be? They play a big role in their life.
Exactly.
So shouldn't they be the most important?
Yeah. So anyway, so here's the thing with the judging concept. Think of it like this: when you meet somebody, they can either help you immensely or hurt you immensely. People have the power to do that, and so because of this dramatic effect, you want to make sure you have a very fine-tuned system to figure out whether someone is your ally or your enemy. If that system is off, you're dead. That's a really important notice to have, and that's why you judge in the first place, and that's why you devote so much brain power to judging. Yeah, and also, actually, but danger. We can like, a girl can look at a guy on the street and say, like, I need to stay far away from this guy because I'm worried that he might try to rape me or something. Right. You can just see it in the facial expression that is being picked up. And girls, by the way, are much better at picking up these cues than guys are, and it probably is evolutionary because girls have to carry a child and stuff, and their life is more important in the offspring. Yeah, you'll actually find there's yes, you're right, and the reason why is I actually think girls are just more intelligent than guys in general because their corpus callosum is greater. So like there's a bridge that bridges two hemispheres of your brain together, and the bridge in girls is bigger and thicker, so that their EQ can talk to their IQ faster, which means they can integrate more emotional signals with more logical rationale. And that's why I think girls are better at having conversations than guys. Like sort of I completely agree. I think girls, it's been shown in so many studies, like have much higher EQ. The one sort of counter argument to it is like, yes, girls have more EQ, but in terms of like, guys tend to have a better ability to focus intently on something and get obsessed with something. Yeah. Not that girls can't, but girls are much better at multitasking, while guys suck at multitasking. Like if a guy's watching television and a girl's talking to him, most likely the guy's not listening to anything the girl's saying, even if you might be saying like, yep. Gotcha. Yeah. And I mean, I just wanted to channel this back to judging, because when you judge someone, like you might ask yourself, okay, I know what judging is, but to break it down further, judging in reality is using your brain to predict, based on past patterns, how someone will react in a given situation. So, in other words, a common theme that I say all the time is that your brain is like a predicting machine, and that's what it does with judging. The whole reason why you're judging someone is so that you can predict their move before they know their move. And that is a very that's a very different way to look at judging, because when you understand that you're just trying to predict the other person, that all of a sudden you realize, oh, it's my predictions that I need to either limit or I need to increase. If you ask yourself, like, am I judging this person? I don't know. Just ask yourself, are you predicting what they would do? And I think that's a great point. And like at the end of the day, like when I discuss these like 4 different categories, it's a lot about balance. Like judgment has a massive effect on our life. It's an important thing, and it's important to do it. But the common tendency of people is to make very harsh negative judgments about a person that the person can then sense. Right. And yes, they are predictions about the future, but are they necessarily accurate? And we'll talk about cognitive fallacies too, because oftentimes we assume qualities in other people that we see in ourselves. So this ties very much into the fundamental attribution error. So when our friend gets into a car crash, we know our friend well, and so like we say like it was situational. But when a random person does, we say it must have been their personality qualities. The person that crashed into. Yeah, and so we make inaccurate judgments. And these inaccurate judgments not only are inaccurate predictions, but they also are sensed by the other person and make the person feel uncomfortable. Right. And so the way that I sort of worked through being so judgmental was to understand that other people
like 90% of the time, other people's mistakes, bad decisions, accidents occurred because of a situation and not because of their personality. Now, I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt here because I'm sure that there are times where their personality plays a role. But I'm saying like their environment, the situations they've grown up in, made it so that the decision that they made seemed to be the most rational of the many decisions they had. And I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt because I want to be a less judgmental person.
Right.
And I believe that it's an assessment that can be controlled by our cognition, and by manipulating our cognition, we can reduce the amount of judgment that we put on a person.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So another thing that I find really fascinating about human interaction is sort of the way in which we indirectly communicate, verbally even. Really? We talked about indirect communication as like from body language and from vocal tonality, but we actually do it a lot verbally too. So picture this situation. So some guy gets pulled over for speeding. I'm pretty sure this is from what's the movie? I forget the movie, but you might know it. But someone gets pulled over for speeding and stuff, and a police officer comes up to him and is ready to give him a ticket and stuff. Well, the guy pulls out his wallet and he moves a $50 bill up slightly.
Right.
And then he tells the officer, why don't we settle this right here? He's not directly saying it, but it's definitely implied by the situation that that's what he's asking. So why does he do this? The other common example is you say like, come up to my room to look at my artwork or something.
Yeah.
Well, between girls and guys, like both the girl and the guy might be like very attracted to each other and like ready to get it on or something.
Yeah.
But they don't say like, come up to my room so we can do this. They say, come up and look at my pictures. So why is it that we communicate in this way?
Why are you avoiding to say the actual event or the actual...
Yeah. So like one of the ways I like to look at social interactions is there's certain like frames going on, like these mini frames that are occurring. And so the frame, it's kind of like a pre-context to the situation. Like I can say something, and based on how I change the tonality, it can alter the frame of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So if I say something like, excuse me, but you're not allowed here or something like that, it's different than say, excuse me, but you're not allowed here. And I'm changing like the pre-context of it.
Right.
So the pre-context here is that both parties know what's happening.
Yeah. Right.
The frame is obviously out there, what is going on. But by saying it indirectly, it gives the power to protect the relationship if one party chooses not to agree. So check this out. So if you directly say, here, police officer, here's $50, I'm bribing you, then the police officer may take it, okay?
Right.
Or he might not take it. If he doesn't take it, then you're going to jail.
Right.
For bribing a police officer.
Yeah,
The girl may come up to your room, or she might not.
By the way, we're saying don't try the bribe on the police officer. By the way,
don't try the indirect way too, because you might get accused of bribing anyway.
Yeah, so don't do that. Yeah.
So basically, it's a means to protect the relationship afterwards. So like, let's say the girl says no to going upstairs. Both parties can pretend that wasn't the real objective.
Yeah.
But if one party says no, then both parties know 100% what the feeling is. They sort of pinged the feeling of the relationship based on that. It's also a pinging method, like how we kind of throw something off the environment to then get feedback and understand it.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add is in like company feedback, like when you're going to propose a solution to the boss, you sometimes do it in steps. Like rather than saying, yes, I think instead of these windmills, we should build like a water dam here. Yeah. Instead of saying that, you would say, I think the windmills are a good job, but are there other alternatives that we could look at as well? And then maybe he says, oh, well, there's solar panels, or like we could build this dam right here. And then eventually, like you say, yeah, well, I've looked at the dam, and I think it actually looks like a very good proposal in terms of cost efficiency.
Yeah. So what you're kind of illustrating is like sort of like a manipulative tactic. And when I say manipulative, don't take it negatively.
Right.
And that was like perfect because that's exactly what I want to end on.
Right.
So manipulation.
Which is a huge topic. And I'll probably do a whole podcast on manipulation just because it fascinates me so much. But let's just like briefly discuss it. So people hear the word manipulation and they think they automatically assume a negative connotation to it. Because you don't want to be manipulated. You don't want to feel like someone's like just saying this to get you to do something, or acting like this, or using a different tone of voice just for something.
But the thing is that manipulation is it's always happening. It's the only way we communicate with each other.
You do it
and
naturally.
You'd just be naive to not see it. It's going on naturally, and you just have to just be a little bit consciously aware to realize that we are constantly manipulating each other.
Yeah, and I don't even know if manipulating is the right word.
Well, it's the right word, but it's just assumed a negative connotation. But it shouldn't, because there's such thing as manipulation to a mutual benefit, where both parties benefit. So is that bad?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could say maybe modifying your behavior to meet the other person. Just use a different word. But the only is like even right now, like as we do this podcast, we're talking like we're talking louder than we normally do. We're like trying to be more attentive. We're not like, hey, how's it going, Paul? I haven't seen you in a while. That whole point is that in this situation, I guess you could say that we're being manipulative, but we're modifying our behavior given the situation, right? So
and so like manipulation is just going on all the time. Like, like girls give a lot of like crap to guys because they're like, oh, this guy's just saying this to manipulate me to do this. But girls wear makeup. Girls wear different clothes. People in choosing which outfits they wear are manipulating people. Manipulation is a thing, and we can either choose to put some conscious effort behind it or just let it occur subconsciously. Now, there's a difference between positive manipulation and negative manipulation, and I think Stephen Covey really illustrated this. I'm actually going to go into Stephen Covey and quickly into C.S. Lewis. But Stephen Covey talks about win-win versus win-lose situations.
Right.
Manipulation is good when you're changing yourself for the betterment of not only your interactions but the people that you're interacting with.
Right.
So when you're learning funny jokes so that people laugh at you, that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
Because both parties win there.
Right.
But when you're like lying to someone so that they are hurt by it, that is a win-lose, and that's when manipulation is characterized as bad. And behavior of that sort will lose you a lot of friends because people will feel it, they'll sense it, and so like that. And so that's where being a good person plays a large role in how people perceive you.
Yeah. One thing I just want to say, this is like a really big thing in manipulation, is talking about what the other person is interested in, like that real talk that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. So a thing I commonly do a lot is I just talk about what the other person is interested in. Now, you might say I'm manipulating them in a bad way, and you might be saying like, oh, Nick's just talking about, I don't know, this fascination they have with zebrafish. Because he just wants to win them over. He just wants to gain their favor.
Now this actually you might want me to bring my C.S. Lewis thing in, because this brings in like a really great point from that.
Yeah.
Before you finish this.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So C.S. Lewis had this great article. It's my favorite one by him, where he talks about natural rewards. And he says certain behavior natural rewards should follow from it. So if a woman marries a man for his money, then there's no natural reward, because you're not marrying the guy for the right reason. But when someone tells a joke so that the other person likes them, that is a natural reward of telling the joke.
Yeah.
But when you tell someone a joke because you want them to eventually give you this or that, then there's no natural reward that's felt. So by you changing your behavior so that you talk about something that another person wants to talk about, the shared camaraderie, the shared vibing, positive emotions that come from it are a natural reward of that behavior.
Okay. Gotcha.
But continue.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what I was trying to get at. So basically, what I'm just saying is that if you're just talking to the person because you don't care about zebrafish and you're just trying to win their favor over, eventually through body language and through tonality of voice, they're going to see that. It's very hard to fake
Well,
that.
if your motive is to win them over as a friend, that's a very natural consequence of our manipulative behavior. Right. But if your motive is to win them over for like a favor, for a specific favor, and you don't see them as a friend, but you're just using them as a pawn in your scheme, then that's not a natural reward, and that's where you feel bad about it.
Sometimes people want to have friends so that they say they can have friends, and that is the reward. Like, I have 10 friends.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that either.
No, but what I'm saying is, like, they don't. They want the title of saying I have these friends. They don't actually care about. They don't
care about.
Doesn't matter. It's the representation of having friends. But that's a separate topic. What I'm trying to say is, instead, the strategy, which I think is very hard to learn, but if you can learn, is very powerful, is to actually not be interested in what you're interested in. So in other words, like, the brain works by being interested in from reverse chronology. So whatever you did last will be the most important thing that you're interested in. Usually it'll have more weight. And that's why, like, you might be gone for a week at a camping trip, and when everyone asks you how it is, you only talk about the last 3 days, not the beginning of the trip. So the whole point is that you gotta erase that completely. Like, you just wipe that out. Mm-hmm. And what I do when I talk about conversation, I just say, what is that person talking about? And, like, what can I learn from that? And usually, just from that attitude, I just end up asking them more questions.
Yeah.
Which then leads them to talk about the subject that, since they were talking about it at the beginning, they're probably more interested in it. And so it just flows naturally, and I'm able to hold the conversation.
There's positive emotions being emitted. When it's important to realize that emotions are more part of the conversation than what's actually being said. People like the emotions they feel from a conversation, not the words that are actually being said. And by talking about something that they are interested in, you're bringing up that positive emotions, and that positive emotions is then spreading to you too.
Right. One common goal I have when I talk to somebody is I go, they are going to be talking 70% of the time, and I'm going to be talking 30%. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is it ends up being 50-50. Yeah. But that mentality of being interested in what they're talking about, and maybe putting some feedback of your own, and then asking them a follow-up question because you're actually interested in it, is one of the best ways I think you can develop relationships.
And I'm going to add something to this too. I read a book a while back where someone distinguished between two forms of communication in the comfort phase. So like when you're talking to someone and you've reached that point where you're not, maybe on the superficial level anymore, or maybe you still are, but you're trying to get there. So there's two things. Like, one big mistake that people make when trying to talk about what the other person's interested in is talking about like indirect things. The thing is that you could ask someone all about, psychology, and they can maybe talk to you for a while about it. But if you really want to get them talking and feeling really good about themselves, then talk about very personal things. Talk about themselves, because almost all people can talk hours and hours on end about themselves.
Yeah.
So when you start making those questions more personal, then people feel really good because they get to express like who they are and the person they are, and they get to feel that you know them better. Just in psychology, they've shown that when we believe that another person sees us as we want to be seen, that's when we like a person.
Yeah.
And so by asking these questions about them personally and getting to see how this person feels about themselves and understanding, then you're going to have like great relationships with people.
Yeah, and that's actually commonly, like, I wondered for the longest time, I said, well, if you're just listening to the other person, why couldn't they just talk to a brick wall? Because they would be literally doing the same thing. If instead they were talking to you, they were talking to a brick wall. And that's the distinction, that they feel that they are being understood by someone in the way that they want to be understood.
And we're social creatures, and so our brain is very affected by our social interaction.
Just something on the side is, if you look at the human brain and how it's structured, like, social interaction is such a huge component. It's like by far in the animal kingdom, our brain is like so structured for social interaction. It's and because of that, it's very unhealthy not to get that.
Yeah, and that is, by the way, why, like, we talk about all these things that our brain is assessing. That is why our brain is capable of all this stuff. All our subconscious is doing a ton of stuff socially. We're manipulating people like crazy all the time, even if we're not consciously aware of it. And that's what Nick is saying, is our brain is just overly developed, not overly,
it's suitably developed.
Suitably developed for the way that in which we interact.
Yeah, and much like, you'll find this through anywhere in health, really. If you don't use a muscle, you'll lose, type of thing. And the same thing with like social interaction. If you don't exercise your social skills, just by talking to people in general, you'll lose your ability to actually do these micro facial gestures, your body language, your tonality of voice. And that's a very serious thing, especially in our day and age with video games and stuff like that.
Social awkwardness. We all know, like, someone who's socially awkward, most of the time isn't because of some genetic quality. Most of it's been environmental. It's because they've sort of ostracized themselves from like the social world while doing something else. And this tendency is more common among guys because, like I said, guys are more focused on one thing, while girls tend to be more socially
and this is like this comes from the stereotypical like World of Warcraft player, because he's like playing like this video game for like 8 hours a day. Obviously all of that's probably an exaggeration. Hopefully it is an exaggeration.
I wouldn't say it's an exaggeration.
Yeah, but the point is that, well, of course he's not going to be good at social interaction because he doesn't exercise it. So it's not a genetic thing. It's not like the point is that because it's not genetic, it can be learned later on. And so that's why like the nerd who does studying all day can actually, 10 years later,
goes on to become the CEO of the company.
That's why, because he can learn social interaction. And there's a whole
we can use our consciousness to manipulate social interaction better than our subconscious does it naturally. I believe we can like learn stuff like learning how to listen to people and stuff that we don't naturally do, and then use that to manipulate behavior for the better. And for the better society.
Now, I want to definitely clarify that we're not medical experts, but there are definitely conditions where you might have like autism or a neurological disorder, and yes, from the genetics, epigenetics, and other environmental factors, you might not be very good at developing social skills. But if I had that condition, I wouldn't prevent myself from, I wouldn't be like, well, I'm not good at it, so I'm not going to try. I would actually keep trying more because I want to make up for what I've lost.
Yeah, and there are examples of people with extreme Asperger's, not just like mild Asperger's. Mild Asperger's is probably pretty common. It's probably like 1 in 100 or more common than that even. But there's even examples of extreme Asperger's where through some psychotherapy, meditation, there's even some new like brain stuff, like where they put something on your head to activate certain parts of your brain.
Yeah, those are electrodes. But that's I think.
They've made a lot of progress socially, and they start seeing the world socially because naturally their brain can't do that.
Yeah. Right.
Why don't we just tie everything up real quick? Right. So I started off with talking about how someone asked like, how do you make a best friend, or like what? And I said that there was 3 things, like shared commonalities, shared goals, and time. And so what I wanted to end on was just that, like, all of these things, like shared goals and stuff, we almost all humans have shared goals among each other. There's generalizations that apply to everybody. So the person who's friends with a lot of people, it's not that he just has way more commonalities with everybody in general. It's just that he's sought out to find those commonalities. Because like all guys have commonalities. All guys are interested in girls. All guys are interested in sports for the most part. It's becoming good with people and developing good friendships. It's just about developing the skill of finding those commonalities, breaking through that superficial phase, and spending time finding those shared goals, spending time with the person, and developing shared experiences with them. So I want to end on that. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you like the new setup.
It's kind of a long podcast. We apologize, but thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. So we'll see you next time.